Cathedral. This is the weekly reflection from Salisbury Cathedral on the 30th of March 2022. Earlier today, over the other side of the world, in Melbourne, Australia, there was a remarkable event at the cricket ground, a huge stadium in Melbourne, where I believe the first international test match between England and Australia, a series which continues to this very day, in fact was rather embarrassingly, crushingly won by Australia earlier this year. It continues ever since the first test match was played back in 1877 at that very ground. It's a fitting place for the event that took place earlier today, which was in honour of the late Shane Warne, a name which lives in the memory of anyone who knows anything about cricket. It may not be that you count yourself among them, and I don't wish to be boring on this subject because it means a lot to me, but a lot of people find cricket fantastically uninteresting. But Shane Warne was a remarkable character, and he is, I suspect, one of the 2 or 3 best cricketers who has ever lived. He has just died earlier this month, I think, at the age of 52, very suddenly and unexpectedly. He had, by international standards, a very long career. He had played for 15 years at the very top level in test matches, and he made extraordinary achievements in that time. I won't bore you with those details. If you know them and are interested in them, you'll know them already. But suffice it to say that he was a fantastically skillful player, and his achievements are unparalleled, except by one other very remarkable player, the Sri Lankan Mattaya Muralitharan, who equalled him probably as a bowler, but in certain circumstances only, and was never many of the other things that Shane Warne could bring to a cricket match. Now, he only retired about 9 years ago from cricket of any kind in his early to mid-40s. And he was always, throughout his long career, and subsequently, what is generally known as a bit of a lad. In fact, it would be fair to say he was a lot of a lad, really. He's someone who blotted his copybook with the authorities quite a number of times, suffered some periods when he had to cease playing. For example, an occasion when he was caught out having taken, probably, or at least by his own word, unintentionally, one of those many drugs that are banned from international sport. I suspect he didn't take it because it would enhance his sporting performance, but for some other reason. But it's the kind of thing that sort of happened to Shane Warne and to people of his kind, really, because he was noted for rather irresponsible behaviour. He never looked the part of an international elite athlete. He had quite a stocky build. He was a smoker and a drinker throughout his life. He was, in many respects, perhaps rather undisciplined. But what he had in abundantly was skill at his craft, that is, a certain kind of bowling, leg spin, and a force of personality which kind of occupied the stage when he was on it. And really it was the combination of those 2 things, the skill which he had developed and the natural attributes he was born with, which contributed to that, of course, and the determination, the personal intensity that he could bring to the cricket pitch and to much else besides. I don't think you can actually achieve anything remotely such as he did unless you bring both skill and a remarkable personality to bear together. His determination was quite astonishing when he sought to win the game for his side, both at his predominant skill, which was bowling, but also in other ways on the cricket pitch, as a fielder, as when he needed to be a batsman, and also as a captain when he had the opportunity. And when he had the chance to lead teams, which was certainly never going to be the team that he most was proud of playing for, which was Australia, he was too much of a loose cannon for the authorities there. But when he did have a chance to lead teams, as he did for many years here in our neighbouring county, Hampshire, he was really successful and really well liked as a captain, a very committed leader of his teams. But as I'm sure was stressed in the event earlier today, which I haven't followed, he was someone who really did like to live life to the full. Now, my former colleague, the former vicar of the close, Canon Ian Woodward, took me some years ago to hear the former England cricket captain David Gower giving a sort of speech of an avuncular kind to an audience in London, where he told a little tale about Shane Warne. It's the kind of affectionate, mildly ribald story which attached itself to people like Warne. Gower said that there were, when he was captain of Hampshire, Shane Warne was captain of Hampshire, there was a poll of the women of Hampshire asking them, among other things, whether they would sleep with Shane Warne. And according to Gower, the poll came back with 30% said no, and 70% said never again. Now, what possible lesson can one take from this life now ended? Tragically early, really. But after, of course, he'd given his best as the athlete, the sportsman that made his name. In a million years, there's no way Shane Warne would have claimed, or anyone would have claimed for him, that he was a saint. And I must say that this penitential season of Lent may seem an odd time to be speaking about such a man in an environment like this. I think nonetheless there are some really striking lessons one can draw from him. First of all, that we really must thank God for the extraordinary gifts that he can give, that he does give to particular people. When we see gifts which are quite above the ordinary, let's thank God for them. They all come from him. Secondly, that there's a lot to thank God for in the pleasure, even if for an England supporter that was very often a kind of tortured pleasure, the pleasure that Shane Warne gave to millions of people around the world by the execution of his gifts on the sporting field and elsewhere. I think we really do need to thank God for free spirits, people who don't really play by the rules, who take a chance, who often embarrass themselves and embarrass those around them, make fools of themselves sometimes, but occasionally do things that some of us more buttoned up people never really could. And finally, and for each of us most importantly, I think, we need to rejoice in the gift of life. As Shane Warne's early death reminds us, it can be quite short, and it's not to be wasted. Let's rejoice in every day as we get it. This was really the message that Jesus conveyed in a parable, which is much more the kind of thing you'd expect someone like me to be dwelling on in an environment like this. Jesus talked in the parable of the talents about not burying them in the ground, but using them. And partly in our thanks, we need to make sure that we don't waste what we've got, the day, the time, and ourselves. Thank you very much for listening, and thank God for Shane Warne. Goodbye.